Hey knitters, I hope you had fun working on your Simple Chunky Mittens with me the last few weeks. As promised, we're going to talk today about how to turn any mitten pattern into flip top mittens. Now, I went ahead and unraveled, you can see I unraveled my mitten, finished the thumb, but unraveled the hand back to about my middle knuckles. It's just under my middle knuckles. That's about where you're going to want your hinge on your flip top to hit. So if you're starting a brand new pair of mittens, or if you want to do the same thing I did and unravel, I know it's a little bit scary, but sometimes it's fun, back to make flip top mittens out of your regular mittens, you're going to want to knit to or unravel back to about your middle knuckles all the way across. And then you can see that I put a needle across half the stitches in the front. Right now, if you're working along with the Simple Chunky Mittens, that's going to be 15 stitches on the front, and then the 15 stitches on the hand are going to be on waste yarn. If you are doing the Simple Chunky Mittens, they are not going to be interchangeable after you add the flip tops. They will have a left mitten and a right mitten. However, you can use this technique on pattern mittens that have like a cable pattern or a lace pattern on the front. You could even probably do it with color work. It's going to be a little bit more tricky though. But you can do it with any of them. And it doesn't change anything when you have a left or right hand mitten. You just always put, wherever you put the needle, that's where your flip top hinge is going to be. The one we're doing is invisible. You're not even going to be able to see it. So grab your needles and let's make some flip tops. To get started, we are just going to knit across this top needle. So this is going to end up being a left hand mitten. But we're just going to knit across these stitches. And then when we get to the end, we are going to flip the mitten over. And we are going to do something that's a little bit fiddly. It's definitely more of an intermediate technique, but if you are a beginner, I believe in you. You can do it. So do you remember the backward loop cast on that we did for when we closed up the gap over the thumb gusset? We are going to do that same thing here for 15 more stitches. So we are going to do that onto this needle for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and my yarn's kind of kinky because, like I said, this was the mitten that I knit for the Simple Chunky Mitten videos, and then there we go, then I unraveled it. 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I knew I did an extra one. 12, 13, 14, 15. So we have 15 stitches there. I'm going to turn that around so it's not, so that's not twisted. If you see how I did that, I cast it on and then I flipped it around. So we do have, you can see this big gap there. That's okay. We'll take care of that later. So what we're going to do now is, since our yarn is all the way back around, this is going to serve as our first row of stitches on our flip top. So we are going to pick this back up, bring it like this, so that we've got the two needles held together there, and then we're going to just use that yarn to knit back across the front of the hand. If we can do it without splitting our yarn. I'm kind of holding, you can see, I'm kind of holding that back needle in place. We don't want the yarn to rotate around that needle while we do this, so I'm kind of holding that back there as I do that first stitch. And this is where you kind of, having that little extra bit there gives you a little bit more flexibility. If it's smaller, it might be a little bit more difficult to knit across. I just find like this keeps it a little bit more stable for those first couple of rounds. We're going to add another needle in here to the mix in just a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep all of the hand stitches on the front of the hand on one needle, and then we are going to divide the flip top stitches onto 2 needles as we knit across. And so since there's 15, I'm going to do 7 on one, 8 on the other. I'm going to kind of try to tighten this up a little bit here, so knitting across these might be a little bit fiddly the first time. So those backward loop cast on stitches like to shrink, but that's good. That means your mitten's nice and well structured. 6, 7, and then again 2. Add in all 4 needles now and knit across these guys too. All right. So that's, you can kind of see the beginning of the flip top there. Here's our regular, here's our front, here is the part that's on the hand, and it's kind of getting loose a little bit here. There's our regular part. So what we're going to do is just keep knitting around. I'm going to actually start, I like to add a little bit of a rib to the bottom of my flip top for about 1 inch or so. And now that we've got those needles good and stabilized on the back with 2 rows of stitches, we're going to add a 1x1 rib across the back on the next couple of rows, just to make it a little bit more stretchy and flexible. I find it lays a little bit better that way as well. And don't worry about the rows on there. We're gonna do enough rows that the stockinette stitch is just kind of gonna fall in line. And if you want to, I'm going to end on a knit stitch on this first needle before we transition to the second one, just like how we did when we were doing the cuff. I suggest adjusting your needles so that you do that same thing, so that you can, adjust your needles so that you end on a purl stitch, and maybe I'll do that the next way around so that you can start your next one with a knit stitch, because that's gonna make that just a little bit tighter. You won't notice as much of a seam between needles there on your finished product if you have loose purl stitches like I do. All right, so we are I'm going to go ahead and switch that stitch over. You can already see that rib is starting to fall in place so that it's, it's going to fall in place. So I'm going to continue like this. I'm going to do until I have ribbing for 1 inch, which is probably about 3 more rows on the mitten top. And then after that, I'm going to do the same thing that we did when we were knitting the hand of the mitten. We're going to knit up until it reaches about here. And then we'll do our decreases. So you can see that I've added a couple of rows, but it hasn't added too much length yet. So I'd say do about 3 more rows of ribbing, and then switch to stockinette, and then we'll start decreasing in just a minute, and we'll have our flip top. All right, so you can see that we knit up to a little bit higher maybe than I said to with the for the decreases, so it's almost up to my top knuckle. That's okay, we want to have a little bit more space on these because we're going to be moving this up and over and pulling it down and all that fun stuff. But you can sort of see how the flip top is starting there. I only knit 2 more rows of the 2 more rows of the rib. I felt it was getting high enough for that, and then I knit maybe 3 rows after that. You don't have to do a lot with the chunky mittens because the yarn is going to be so big and everything. So we're going to move now into working on the decreases. So we are going to do the decreases all the way around, just like you would on the Simple Chunky Mittens pattern. So we're going to start with the knit 5, knit 2 together, do a round, and all of that good stuff. And that shouldn't take us too long. We've got these really great chunky yarn and big needles. Makes a nice, quick, fun project. Alright, so as you can see, I have finished off the mitten just like it was written in the pattern, and you will find the link to that on the blog, tinydinostudios.com, Simple Chunky Mittens pattern. You can see here at the back it's not quite finished. We've got the flip top, it flips up, flips off, your hands are free, but we've got this little gap here. And that is why we left these stitches live. What we're going to do is we're going to put these back on the needles, and we are going to knit flat for about half an inch, maybe an inch, in another rib pattern. So that'll close this gap up, and then we'll do some tightening along these sides. You can see here's our big gap where we cast on all those backward loop stitches, and then we will have a finished flip top mitten just like that. So let's get going on putting the stitches back on the needle, and I'm just going to do this just like I did when we were picking up the thumb gusset. I'm going to leave that waste yarn in there while I pick up the stitches. Waste yarn's getting in my own way. And there's, like always, there's that little stitch at the end. Oops, and we just missed it. There we go, got it. Okay, so I'm gonna break that and then pull it out. And then we are just going to knit across, just knit flat, no knitting in the round. Just use the same needles, and I'm going to start off with a rib. So a 1x1 rib all the way across. That'll kind of help those two rib sections will kind of help each other Velcro together when they're on your hand. so that they'll stay put when you want them closed, and then when you need to get your keys or buckle the baby in the car seat, or, you know, open the door, whatever it is that you need, that you want to be able to feel what you're doing, you can just flip those tops off, have your fingers free for a minute, and then get back to doing whatever it was you were doing in the first place. Another cool thing, you could apply this same principle to the thumb. If you wanted to have a flip top on the thumb, it'd be an teeny tiny flip top. But if you wanted your hands free to text or whatever, you could do that. I am mostly worried about having my hands free for transportation issues, finding keys in bags, getting the kiddos into the car seat, whatever else, things like that. I don't like putting my mittens on and taking them off constantly, so I don't mind having my thumb covered. I'm not using my phone when I'm in the car or on a walk, or if I need to like start an audiobook or start some music or something, I usually can just use my forefinger for that. So we're going to do this for a couple more rows. Like I said, probably about maybe I'd probably go 3/4 of an inch to an inch long before we stop, and then I will show you guys how to tighten up those seams and make it nice and neat. Alright, so you can see here I've got my little ribbing section. I went ahead and knit the whole inch because I was about where I wanted to stop, but I was on the wrong side, and I like to cast off going this way so that I've got my yarn tail on both sides. That way I can tuck these in there. And you can see it's been a little while. I just made some butternut squash soup for dinner, just got that on the stove, so now my hands are orange. But I'm gonna have some delicious soup for dinner and over the next couple of days, so it's alright. And if you're following along, I was complaining about the weather not being very fall-like. It was 39 degrees this morning. It was quite lovely. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of tighten this up a little bit, and we're going to attach this part, because you can see right now it's just sort of flappy, loosey-goosey. We're going to attach that part to the inside of the mitten, but we're going to have to do it very carefully so that we do not hit the flip part. So we're going to sort of aim for this area right in here so that it's below the hinge, and we can see the hinge really easily on this side because the hinge is going to start with these loose stitches, but we're going to tighten those up. So I'm going to start by just looping through that stitch there, and then just kind of whipping around and doing the same thing up that far. And then here's where we want to be careful, where we don't want to hit the hinge, and we kind of want to do it a little bit more on the inside as we go up. So it's going to tighten up just the structure of the mitten a little bit. You can see I'm still edging below that hinge. And it's not, you can see it's pretty, it's not perfect, but it's pretty neat there. So then we're just going to do one more loop around, and that is all attached, and the hinge still flips open over it, and then we're going to kind of just loop in up and around there before we weave this end in here. And we're doing that into the reverse stockinette on the bottom side of the flip top. All right. And then going to come over here and do the same thing. So this hinge stitch is a little bit harder to see, but you can see right here is where the hinge starts. So this is where we're going to be aiming for to attach this, but we're going to have to go backwards since we're starting at the top this time. Kind of hit it down there and pick up a couple of each of these stitches so that it's firmly attached, that there's no gap. And then we're gonna weave it in to the bottom of the hand right here. All right, so let's take a look, make sure it's working before we cut anything off or check around it. So here's what the mitten looks like from the top. Nice and snug. Pretty much like it looked the first time around. And then we flip that back. We've got free fingers. I made this one maybe a little bit taller than I normally go. I want it to be really nice and warm and snug. I've got it up nice and tall over my fingers just a little bit. If you want your flip top to be longer, all you have to do is just start it lower on your hand. So you could start it as low on your hand as you do like as your bottom knuckles, like at the top of you could maybe an inch up from the thumb gusset. And maybe if I was doing like a pair of worsted or gloves that I wanted to be cooler, I would do that. This will give me just enough mobility to, and I'll cut these off in a minute, just enough mobility to get the kids' car seats buckled and find my keys in my coat pocket, that sort of thing. So I am going to knit myself a second one of these, and I will show that to you guys in the next video. Coming up, we are going to be talking about doing the same sort of mitten, just a simple mitten, but with a worsted gauge, and we're also going to talk about how to size that to do it just for anybody. This is for a women's medium. We're going to start working on a women's medium. That's probably the most versatile size that I have found to work with. But after that, we will talk about knitting a worsted mitten, doing what you want with it, making a fingerless glove, making it into a flip top, or making it into just a regular mitten. And then we will talk about how you can easily figure out the math to move it up size for a man's glove, move it down a size for a kid's glove or mittens, because I only do mittens. Fun fact, I despise knitting fingers. So that's what we're going to be working on next. Use hashtag mitten selfie or hashtag Simple Chunky Mittens to tag your pictures of these guys on Instagram and Facebook. I will be collecting pictures of those, and I am excited to talk about worsted weight mittens with you guys next week.